And our story begins with some guy walking down a dark alley at night. He felt someone behind him. He immediately realized he was being stalked by Stalker, which naturally excited him. Then the action shifts to the future without showing us what ended the pursuit of the protagonist. At this point, he reports that he returned from a break, and we learn that his name is Rindo Tachibana, and he works part-time in a piercing store and is a very good-natured guy. His coworker is very happy to see him and congratulates him on his return. It turns out her name is Mariko Sanda, and she is a punk in the work group, and she also responds to mansions and machama. Suddenly, the guy takes in his hand the letters which he says are love letters that he raked out of the mailbox yesterday, after the surprised girl asked how many of them there are. He said that there are at least 20 of them. Mariko tells the guy that maybe Stalker does exist, but the guy only emphasizes that he only brought the letters because she said he was lying. The girl immediately emphasizes that she was just kidding and asks to see one letter. After opening the letter, the girl sees that it is really meant for her friend and that the letter really has love content. The person who wrote the letter said that he admires the guy from afar and likes the way he laughs and smiles and confesses his love to him. Seeing this, the girl asked how many such letters there are, because she thinks it's not even funny, and jokes that he wrote them secretly. Of course, the main character immediately fell down and said that the girl is a fool. He emphasized that of course he did not write these letters, and emphasizes that he is in the shit, because all yesterday he had a feeling that someone was following him. He also reports that he receives calls from unknown numbers, and he receives these letters with strange content, and he has no idea what is going on. The girl immediately asks if this stalker could be his ex-girlfriend, but the guy says it's impossible. Then the girl asks the guy not to throw away these letters, and also advises him to go to the police. But the guy thinks that even if he goes to the police with these letters, they can't help him. Suddenly, their conversation is interrupted and a visitor enters the room where they are working. The guys naturally treat the customer with respect and greet him. Suddenly, the protagonist noticed that a girl came in, and captivated by her beauty could not take his eyes off her. He thought it was his jackpot, but his colleague was not confused, and immediately asked what time the girl had a session. When suddenly the visitor said that she did not have a session. Then Mariko apologizes to the client and says that they do not accept without an appointment. But the main character as if does not pay attention to their conversations and just admires the beauty of the girl. He thinks that she is very cute and her ponytails drive him crazy. He immediately thinks about how to find out the name of the girl and thinks that the best option would be to ask his colleague, but without interfering in their conversation, says that they have free time in the next few days and asks when it will be convenient for the girl, but she immediately refuses. And then Mariko asks, what is the purpose of this girl's visit? Then the visitor turns to the main character, who naturally was very much surprised by this. He at first could not even understand how she knew his name, but suddenly the girl apologized for coming here so unexpectedly and asked if the guy was still at work. Not understanding what was going on, the protagonist began to stutter a little, and before he could answer, he heard something that turned his world upside down. Suddenly, the girl said that she loves him, of course. Hearing this, the protagonist and his colleague very much surprised and blushed because they could not expect it. But the visitor also very shyly asked the guy if he would go out with her. Mariko, who is watching all this, is naturally very surprised and can't understand if this is really happening. But she can see how happy the guy is. At this time, the visitor continues to talk to the main character and informs him that she realizes that it sounds very strange, but still the cork hints that if he will be free after work, they can meet. The surprised Rindo said that he was ready to go out with her without even listening to the girl's proposal, but he thought that it was too good to be true. While still looking at the girl, he could not refuse her. The girl, who did not hide her joy, grabbed the protagonist's hand, asked if he really agreed, because she could not believe it. So if he really agreed to go out with her, she said that she would wait for him at the cafe opposite the station. Right after that sentence, she said that she had to go, and so they would see each other at the cafe. While Rindo stared at her blankly, Mariko said it was really weird and wonders what the guy is going to do, but he just asks if it was a dream and emphasizes that the girl squeezed his hand. He even asks God not to play with him because he's never been popular with girls, so he can't expect this, and he has no choice. So he'll just go with the flow and accept whatever happens. Naturally, he immediately tells his colleague that he'll leave right after the end of the shift. But the girl doesn't even want to stop him. She says that they don't have records today and it's going to be a while, so he can go. And she realizes that their boss is going to check on them today, and that could get them in trouble. With a twinkle in his eye, the Rindo immediately packs up and leaves, and the girl thinks it will be very interesting and says that this time she will help him while calling him a tiger and wishing him good luck. In the end, she realizes that no man will not refuse an invitation from a beautiful girl to go to a cafe. After a while, the protagonist is already in the cafe and meets his beloved. Being in front of his beloved, Rindo decides that he must do it because he is a real man, and the girl is an important part of his life. At the same time, he realizes that he used to have bad luck with girls, and he wonders what his interesting ex-girlfriends are doing now. Suddenly, it turns out that among his ex-girlfriends was a hysterical, crazy girl and a cheater, but the protagonist apologizes for keeping the girl waiting and asks what her name is. Suddenly, we learn that the girl's name is Amain. At the same time, Amani says that she couldn't have expected that the guy would actually come to meet her, and says that she's very nervous about it. At this point, the protagonist notices in his head that she is cute and very innocent, which in his case is the perfect combo. But he still thinks it's too good to be true. While he is immersed in his thoughts, Amain doesn't realize what's going on. He begins to think that he is 500% sure that one of his friends is playing a joke on him, while the protagonist admits that it may be true. And he swears to God that if something strange starts happening, he will leave immediately. At this point, Amene interrupts his thoughts and asks if he wants something to eat. And looking at the girl, the guy asks himself, what are the odds that she is his stalker? Naturally, Rindo doesn't refuse dinner and tells the girl to go and get something to eat, while he asks her what she prefers. Then the girl says that she's ready to eat anything but fish. The happy guy says that it's very good because he doesn't like fish either, and informs that there is an Italian restaurant nearby and invites the girl there. The girl immediately agrees and with loving eyes looking at the guy tells him it's going to be fun. At this point, the guy thinks now's a good time and thinks this girl could really be his stalker. After a short time, they are already in bed where they are going to continue their pastime. At this point, the protagonist doesn't care if she's a stalker or not, because he cares about what's going on now, because he's a real man. While they are together, Rindo learns that the girl is actually a guy. After a short time, he tells his friend what happened, looking very tired. His friend naturally says that it is very scary and sounds like a nightmare. According to him, he does not even know what to say, because it is worse than blackmail. But he is still interested in how the protagonist was able to escape. But then Rindo put his head down on the table and said that he hadn't run away, which naturally surprised his friend very much, while Lindo said that he just couldn't do it. It turns out that the protagonist could not even know how much this decision would affect his life. The next day, Rindo woke up with a terrible headache. He realized that yesterday he had clearly had too much to drink and did not notice how he passed out. At the same time, he remembers what happened to him this morning. It turns out his friend dragged him to his house, not to leave the guy. Of course, the protagonist thanked his friend, but as soon as he came to himself, immediately went home. While looking at his phone, he saw a message from Amane, his newfound friend stalker, asking if they could meet today, and if he was busy before work, at which point the protagonist thought about the fact that he had to go to work tonight. So the best solution would be to go eat and sleep. Irindu realizes that they have exchanged numbers, and a little thinking about it realizes that everything is going too fast. In his opinion, talking to Amani like this is a little strange, because he just wants to eat and sleep, and he does not understand what his stalker wants. After not responding to Amanette's message, the protagonist heads to his home, thinking that he doesn't want to see anyone today, so he just wants to stay home. But going to his house, he is very much frightened because he sees someone's shoes there, and also he hears the footsteps of some person in his house. He immediately thought about who it could be and was very much frightened. When he heard footsteps approaching him in his house, the protagonist was startled and began to hiccup, and suddenly he saw Aman, who, at first sight, immediately began to cry out that he was a burglar. But Amani started to calm him down, and then the protagonist snapped, asking what the hell he's doing in someone else's house because it's an illegal invasion. But the calm stalker asks his buddy to calm down and not to get his finger in his eye. He also says that he came here as a friend, because the door was unlocked. Of course, Rindo didn't understand what the guy was talking about at first, but he tells him that he just thought he had done a rash thing by leaving the door open and decided to just keep an eye on his house. He also says that Rindo shouldn't do that anymore because it's very careless, and he doesn't forget to mention that he realizes that he can protect himself. But things happen in life, so he asks what would happen if someone dangerous broke in. Rindo thought about it for a moment and realized that if the door was really unlocked and he forgot to do it, he should be grateful to his new friend. But he was still very angry and wanted to hit Amane. Then Rindo emphasizes that his friend could have just texted him about it to begin with, but he immediately says that he did and asks if Rindo saw the message. Then Rindo remembers that Amane did text him about it. Still very angry, Rindo grits his teeth and thanks Amane, but he hears back that there is nothing to thank him for. Rindo emphasizes that he's back now and everything is fine, so his buddy can go home. But Amane isn't about to give up and asks Rindo if he's hungry. But the protagonist couldn't stand it and snapped, not expecting it, when suddenly Amane thought he was being very nice in response to his rudeness. Then this made the protagonist even angrier, and he simply asked his stalker to shut up and emphasized that he was really hungry. At this point, Amane said he just wanted to have a little chat and asks, "So why don't they talk over a meal?" He immediately says he'll cook something quick, and then they'll talk. After a short time, the main character enters the kitchen and is surprised to notice that the food is already on the table, while he sees that everything looks very appetizing. At this point, Amane comes up to him again and, apologizing for taking the protagonist's dishes without asking, tells him that he ordered food and asks if he likes fried rice. Rindo, surprised that Amane knew about it, immediately asks how he did it. But then Amane theatrically says that he's really sorry for following the protagonist and won't do it again. Immediately afterward, Stalker hands his object of lust, tea, and offers him something to eat first. Then the protagonist carefully begins to examine the tea bottle, trying to make sure that it has not been opened before, thus making himself safe. Seeing that the bottle is indeed unopened, he immediately starts feeding his stalker the food he was about to eat, obviously to make sure it's safe for him as well. But Amane, who has no idea why the protagonist is doing it, thinks it's a nice thing to do and is surprised that the Rindo fed him. But Rindo didn't hide his actions for long and immediately emphasized that it doesn't look like he did anything to his food. Of course, Amane is very surprised that his friend could think that about him and emphasized that he didn't put anything in it. But the protagonist is adamant and says that he should have checked the food. Right after these words, he thanked his stalker for the food. But the words of gratitude had no effect on Amane's mood. He asked his buddy if it's true that he doesn't trust him, but then the protagonist asked if Stalker should really complain about it. Then he says that he emphasized it before but will repeat it now. According to him, he is not a lover of men, and even if Amane wants to be his friend, he still doesn't know anything about him. Hearing these words, the Stalker thought about it, but his thoughts were again interrupted by the protagonist, who said that if he did it again, he would really hate him. And if he wanted to talk about something, let him contact him, and also stopped following him. Amane is immediately with the protagonist, emphasizing that he understands him, while Rindo looks at his buddy and reflects that he'd like to think that Amane wouldn't do anything strange, but he's still not sure. Looking directly at the man who has been stalking him for so long, Rindo realizes that he still can't understand this guy, because he doesn't even know how he found out about him. But anyway, he thinks it would be better if he would first deal with the fact that he is not stalking him anymore. But he realizes that Amane probably really loves him, so he doesn't want to reject him too harshly. But he's still a pervert in Rindo's opinion. At this point, the protagonist remembers how it all happened. He thinks about the fact that the drugs the stalker gave him mixed with the alcohol in his system, and he lost the ability to resist. But he realizes that Amane spent more time on foreplay than on the process itself, and he imagines this picture in his head. But the protagonist decides that it still pisses him off because his imagination scares him, because what he imagined was too realistic. He gets sick just thinking about it. Suddenly, Amane interrupts Rindo from his thoughts and asks him if he's okay. At first, the protagonist didn't even realize what was required of him. But then Aman says that the rental is trying to be friends with him and that he's really nice. He says that the protagonist is a very generous and forgiving person, and he's a little worried about him but he emphasizes that he understands that it may sound strange coming from his mouth. But Rindo didn't understand what his new friend was trying to tell him. When suddenly he gets all sentimental and says he's in love with Rinda too, then Ponik Sharinda says it's all clear to him. But Amane is not discouraged, and when he says that he will clean up, he also notes that Rindo is right, and he doesn't know anything about him, so he decides that from now on they should try to get to know each other better, and make sure that Rindo closes the door. A slightly annoyed protagonist asks how long he'll keep saying that. But then Amani remarks that he shouldn't talk about it, but that Rindo should be wary of suspicious people and situations. Naturally, the protagonist is again a little angry and asks his stalker's mind what he is talking about, and his exes or people he does not know. According to him, Amane is a very unscrupulous person. In response to this, he hears that Amani just feels worried about his friend. When Amani saw the earring stand, he was surprised because he said it was beautifully laid out, while the room was in chaos. At the same time, he cannot take his eyes off the jewelry and notices that it is all perfectly clean. Naturally, Rinda is not very happy about the invasion of his personal space and rudely asks his friend not to touch anything, while he did not even think to listen to the protagonist, and looking at one of the earrings asks what it is. When he saw the dragon-shaped earring there, he was very much surprised at how much fine work had been done on that earring, and he didn't realize why there was only one. He said he rarely wears it now because it's usually just lying there, and he said it's quite expensive, but it's also a special earring for him for some reason. Dear friends, and if you want to see the continuation of this beautiful story, then be sure to subscribe to my channel and like this video, because when under it will gather 50,000 views or 5,000 likes, I will definitely do for you the continuation. And to make it happen quickly, skidit this video to your friends who may also like it. Well, and we will continue our fascinating story. Naturally, Stalker thought this was a very interesting fact and said he wanted to know more about the main character. Naturally, Rindo was a little embarrassed by this push from his newfound friend and even blushed a little. But when Amani saw this, he immediately emphasized that Rindo must be tired after eating, and so he would go home. But before he left, Stalker tried to tell the Rindo about the door, which made him incredibly angry. Then the guy started saying that he would definitely close the door, but he was a little embarrassed that Stalker was too close to his face. Seeing the protagonist's extraordinary reaction, Amane kissed his lover with a little hesitation. He was once again angered by the Rindo and told that he would kill him, but apparently Amane wasn't too frightened by the threats. And even afterward, he said that he would suggest to Rindo to go out the next time they both have time off. Also, Amane said that he would notify Rindo about it. Immediately afterwards, being already at the front door, Stalker tells the protagonist to have fun at work, while he thoughtfully looking at the closed door thought that this should not happen, of course, and also interested in how he could know when he has the next day off. At this time in the salon where the protagonist works, Mariko argues with the manager of the salon about whether the protagonist is dating that girl. Mariko notes that if they are not dating, she will buy the manager a drink. And he responds by saying that in that case, he's putting a coupon on the line for a one-night massage, and we learn that his name is Nora-san. Naturally, at this moment, the Rindo himself enters the salon, who is surprised to see what is going on there and can't understand anything. But Nora-san couldn't help himself and immediately asked his colleague what happened between him and that girl, as well as Mariko asks him not to languish and tell them everything quickly. Seeing the pressure in his coworkers, Rindo could only pronounce the name of the girl who actually turned out to be a guy, which turned on his coworkers even more, and they immediately asked him another question. Was it really that crazy? According to the girl, they just thought that he couldn't wait to tell them about it, and she told him that she had bet on him and that he should share the information with them. But Rindo was in no hurry to share his personal life and said that he was lonely as always. Of course, Mariko was not satisfied with this answer, and she immediately asked what kind of attitude to the manager, and also asked if it was really because the girl was now dating him. The main character emphasized that Amane was not his girlfriend, which naturally made Mariko very upset because she lost the argument. Seeing the argument between his colleagues, Rindo got a little angry, while behind him came Issei Yanagi, a man who is a friend of the manager and also a regular customer of the salon. He emphasized that he would silence them and asked Rindo not to get so upset before work. Seeing the regular customer before his eyes, The Rindo immediately rushed to apologize to him and tried to justify himself by saying that he hadn't noticed him enter. When he saw the surprised look on Rindo's face, he noticed that something had gone wrong and asked if the protagonist was free after work and if they could have a drink together. This question made the protagonist incredibly happy, and he replied that of course he agreed, while in his head he praised Yanagi-san, thinking that he was a very good man, but for a regular customer, it was as if it was a normal gesture. And smiling, he asked if someone was working or if he would leave. Also, he informed the manager that he had an appointment and also asked if he was aware of it. Immediately, the manager got to work and informed the protagonist that he was going to get a Yanagi piercing, so he asked if he could stand behind the counter. Naturally, the Rindo agreed and thanked in his mind Yanagi-sana. At this point, the manager is already asking the customer what they will punch this time and whether it will be an ear. But the customer said that he has not yet decided what he will punch today. The manager also said that he noticed that the client got along with Rin, and when Yanagi heard that, he was a little stunned at first and emphasized that he was trying to be friendly with the protagonist. But so far, it's not going so well. But he wouldn't say that they are friends. After hearing these words, the manager seemed to relax a little and said that if everything was really like that, then everything was fine. And he slapped the client twice on the head, which made him a little nervous, and asked the manager what was wrong with him. At this moment, Amane is smoking and thinking about his future plans. He believes that Senda, Issei, and Yanagi are his rivals in the fight for the protagonist's heart. It turns out that Stalker had already prepared in advance and dossiers on all those who he considers his opponents in this battle. He also believes that none of them should not stand in his way. Then the action shifts to the next day. Amane wrote to the main character and asked if he really wasn't working tomorrow, so he suggested he go out together. Reading the messages, Dean realizes that if he does not agree, his new friend will again do something unexpected for him, and he does not like both options, both the one with the meeting and the one with the unexpected act. But he still does not cease to be pleased that at least he now knows who is following him. But he still decides to be careful, because he well remembered the words of his stalker that he wants to get to know him. Suddenly, countries and thoughts creep into his head, and he characterizes Amane as a pervert who wears women's clothes and bullies people like him. The last thing he wants in his life is to have another weird desire awakened in him, at which point some images of him spending time with his stalker pop into his head, but even his own thoughts disturb the protagonist, and he cannot understand what he is thinking about because he is not an accomplice of such a pastime. He even realizes that he makes things worse with his thoughts. Suddenly, a man from the outside asks the protagonist if he is really talking to the wall. Then Rindo turned around and saw Yanagi in front of him, who greeted him nicely, and then immediately the protagonist asked him if he was waiting for Rindo. But Yanagi immediately said that he did not do anything like that. Then Rindo changed the topic of their conversation and asked where the client went after he got a piercing. But he said that he didn't go anywhere, and he just hung out at their salon. Among other things, Yanagi showed Rindo that he had a piercing on the back of his head, which naturally surprised the protagonist. Then the rental recalls saying that Senda had noticed that Yanagi had decided to punch a very unexpected place, and the girl had also noticed that it looked sexy. But Yanagi immediately asked what the protagonist was getting at, and emphasized that he just wanted a piercing like that. So he had it done. According to him, sometimes you don't need more than that. This made the grind finally smile for the first time in a long time, and he remarked that it did look very cool. Suddenly, we find out that Yanagi is a tattoo artist, and he has a huge bird on his chest, which the protagonist has glimpsed a couple of times. And it turns out that Yanagi sometimes works as a model, and even men think that he is super handsome. And although the protagonist, in his own opinion, is not as handsome as him, he regularly calls him for a drink, so he concludes that he probably likes him. Of course, the protagonist realizes that he is even very jealous of him, as well as the manager, but still the latter is a little less so. The beautiful face of Yanagi seems to glow right in front of the protagonist. Yanagi gently touches Rindo's throat and tells him that he too would like a tattoo like the one on his chest. Suddenly creates a hot guy atmosphere that Yanagi radiates. Also, according to him, the main character's skin is very clean, and so the session will be easy and pleasant. He offers to give some tattoo to the main character if he doesn't mind, of course. Naturally, Rindo doesn't refuse the offer and says it's a very good idea, with his class getting a little teary-eyed too. And he thinks it's because of the hot guy's aura literally burning through his eyes. Rindo finally begins to realize why there are so many women in Yanagi's salon, but he's interrupted by Yanagi himself, who tells him not to worry because he won't tell anyone, and also suggests he go to their usual place. At this point, Rindo, who is overjoyed, says that he is happy with everything, and suddenly notices that he has received a new message. Looking at his phone, he tells Yanagi that he wants to eat, to which he receives a positive response. When we see who wrote to him, we find out that it's Amane again, asking Rindo if he's at work today. Rindo, who didn't understand the question at first, said he didn't, because his shift was over for the day. Amane reads the messages of his interlocutor carefully. He already knew everything in advance, because after comparing all the facts, he realized that Rindu's shift had already ended. And usually when his shift ends early, he goes out for a drink with someone. So Aman realizes that he will be home late, even more so. Analyzing the style of communication of his interlocutor stalker, realizes that judging by the way he writes that Rindo is trying to get rid of him to go to the bar. In Amane's opinion, Rindo does this to him because it's much easier to apologize to him in the end and argue that he's just drunk too much and forgot about him, while Amane easily guesses that Rindo is just dynamiting him, which in turn is almost the same thing as blowing him off. For him, it is a heavy psychological blow, because everything is heavier than he could assume, and he even wants to cry, because he realizes that he is no different from those who have gone. After a while, the protagonist and Yanagi are already in a bar, while Yanagi notices Rindo's strange behavior and wonders if someone should write to him. In return, Rindo is very surprised and apologizes, asking if he really noticed it. But Yanagi turns out to be a pretty understanding friend and says it's okay, and if the protagonist needs to contact someone, he shouldn't hesitate, especially if it's really important. Naturally, Rindo is worried about how much Yanagi can see in his phone, but says that he will write to his friend later. At this point, Yanagi is still not going to give up and asks his friend to take it easy and answer the message because he assumes that it is his girlfriend. When Rindo hears this, he spills his drink and asks if Yanagi is talking about the girl they were talking about at the salon this afternoon, but he immediately notices that they have nothing, in response to which he hears Yanagi say that he just heard it from Senda. The protagonist then emphasizes that he really wants to find a girl, noting in his head that he wants a real girl. Of course, when Yanagi hears about it, he says that Sariko told him about something like that, and immediately inquired about a girl who seemed to be his type. But since it didn't work out, he decided to ask what he didn't like. Then the protagonist denies it and says that it was just a long story, realizing that Amane is really his type. But Yanagi is still very persistent, and deciding to tell the protagonist that he knows everything, he emphasizes that no matter how much he likes the man, he would not date the guy. These words shocked the protagonist, from which he was even at first confused, but coming to his senses, he immediately asked how he could know about it. It turns out that Yanagi overheard the entire conversation when he was at the same bar where the protagonist and his friend were. He reports that he was literally sitting next to them when the protagonist was telling his friend about his date. This information made the protagonist incredibly embarrassed and ashamed of the incident, because he assumed that Yanagi had found out about everything in this way. He then asks Yanagi to forget everything he heard, but Yanagi simply points out that the protagonist's face looks very strange, and asks him to relax a bit about it. It turns out that Yanagi even then thought of approaching the protagonist, but did not dare to do so, because he noticed that he was already drunk, that he heard that he was just nearby and did not want to eavesdrop. Of course, these words do not comfort the protagonist, and he still blushes and notes that he is ashamed of the whole story, while trying to tell Yanagi not to spread the word. But before even finishing his thought, Yanagi emphasized that he shouldn't worry about it, because he wouldn't say anything and to anyone. After calming down a bit and taking a glass of beer, the protagonist thanked Yanagi and also said that if Senda found out about it, he would have to kill her. Of course, this surprised Yanagi, and he asked if the protagonist would really try to kill Ma-chan. But Yanagi is not going to interrupt this very unusual conversation and asks if Rindo is still not over that guy, to which he gets a positive answer. When Yanagi hears this, he says he's well aware that he doesn't have to tell him anything, but he notes that he shouldn't see him anymore. He argues that if you think about it, Amane is not normal, and there's no guarantee that he won't do something else. So he thinks he should go to the police and break up with him. Also during the conversation, Yanagi stops the waitress and asks her to bring another glass of whiskey. Rindo at the same time says that Yanagi is probably right. And of course he realizes that this is true, because if his friend were in the same situation, he would say the same thing. One of his main arguments for this opinion is that if he's really so afraid that something might happen to him, then he should break up with him because he's been too soft. But that argument falls apart, and Rindo realizes that if he does, he'll feel sorry for Amane. The unexpected clap brought the protagonist out of his thoughts and made him a little scared. But Yanagi only wanted to ask what his expression was and emphasized that he shouldn't be so worried. And in order to distract him, he offers him to eat adamam. And as soon as Arindu tries to say something, Yanagi shoots the food right into his mouth. A little remark for those who do not know. Adamame is immature soybeans boiled in water right in the pods. Yadam also emphasizes that if the protagonist has any problems, he can just tell him. He also says that he's all at the protagonist's disposal if he wants to talk to anyone. And he also mentions that Rindo shouldn't dwell too much on what happened. These words made the protagonist even tear up and soften for a while, because they turned out to be very important to him at the moment. At the same time in the salon, the losing party is giving the winning party a massage. At the same time, a girl says that Rindo is a big lucky guy because he got lucky with Yanagi. Hearing this, the manager got interested and asked what she was talking about. Then the girl emphasized that the two of them went drinking again, and Yanagi treats Rindo like a little brother. This information made the manager sad, and he asked the girl if she was really thinking the same thing he was thinking. Then she did not deny anything and said that from the outside it looks like that. After all, they regularly hang out together and do not call them. Then the manager emphasizes that it's probably because of the girl, because if the protagonist drinks with her, things could take an unexpected turn. During their conversation, the door opens and the surprised girl is surprised that it might be a customer, but she realizes that they are closing soon, and the arrival of a customer at this time is quite unusual, so she decides to go and see who is there, while the manager asks her not to bother because he will go himself. Then stepping behind the screen, he said hello to a visitor who had come into their salon. Turns out it was Aman who said hello, and noting that everything here was beautiful, decided to ask if he could see it. Naturally, he decided to play a little comedy and pretended not to know that the salon is about to close, in response to which he heard the manager's answer that there is nothing wrong with it, and he should not worry about it. Then the manager also asked the client if it was his first time with them, to which he heard a positive answer. Amane also emphasizes that he does not even have his ears pierced yet, but he also emphasizes that he is thinking about it, and therefore he wonders if the manager can advise him. The next day, the protagonist lay in his bed, having just woken up after a long sleep. Of course, like all ordinary people, he immediately went to his smartphone to see what was new. He was surprised that the morning had come so quickly, and after opening a chat room with Amane, we learned that the protagonist had agreed to meet with him today. After that, it's the usual morning routine, during which the protagonist brushes his teeth and thinks about the fact that Yanagi-san warned him. But he decides that in order to talk to his stalker, he needs to see him. And he decides that if he tries to do something strange again, he will do as Yanagi advised. He receives a message from Amani wishing him a good morning and wondering if he's crazy or if they're really going on a date today. Naturally, this rhetoric pisses off the protagonist a bit, and he asks Amain not to call their meeting that way. The protagonist also realizes that he is a good person because he hears about it all the time from others. And he thinks so too, and also because despite what he has done, he still wants to be friends with Amani Kama and tries to understand his feelings. That's why he decided to give him a chance today, but only one. And if he misses it, they will never see each other again. Next, we see the same messenger chat only on Amane's side. He reads a message that the aggressive protagonist asks not to call it a date because they had previously agreed on it. It turns out that Amane hasn't been able to sleep, thinking that he's not dreaming after all, but he thinks the rude messages from his friend are nice. Knowing that he is about to meet his lover, Amane is very nervous. Even though he realizes that the meeting is only 2 hours away, he even suggests that he is probably overreacting. But he's still very happy that the protagonist agreed to see him, because he used to show his affection for him, trying not to draw attention to himself. And their relationship was one-sided. Looking in the mirror, he realizes that he's come a long way from being able to touch the ring. But he's embarrassed by his bags under his eyes and finds himself wanting to hug himself and hope that everything will be okay. In his opinion, everything is going exactly as he had planned, but he still realizes that for Rindo, they are just friends today, so he should behave accordingly. As he suddenly gets the strange thought that maybe the protagonist would like Amani to dress up as a girl today, he immediately dismisses the thought, realizing that it's hardly true, and he just has to be very sensitive. When the moment of their meeting came, the protagonist arrived a little earlier than they had discussed, and realized that Amane had not yet shown up at the previously agreed-upon location. He suddenly noticed a pink-haired girl who looked a lot like Aman, which scared him a little, because Amane had told him that he'd only done it to get close to him, and he wouldn't do it again. Even the protagonist himself suggests that he would not dress up like that to go out, because they are not on a date. While admitting that it may be reality, he has a desire to go home. At the moment when Rindo tried to touch that girl, he was suddenly grabbed by Amane's hand, which naturally made the protagonist relax a little, but also confused him. Amani looks at his lover and assumes he might want to meet that girl, and asks the protagonist to tell him that he doesn't. Rindo, who naturally had no intention of meeting anyone, at first didn't understand the question, and then said that it wasn't that, and he just thought that the girl might be Amani. After hearing this, Stalker again makes his assumption and thinks that maybe the protagonist was going to chat with that girl, but Rindo naturally denies everything. Amane emphasizes that they are on a date and the protagonist is staring at other girls, which makes him sad. But Rindo doesn't say anything to him and just says that he is really starting to piss him off. When he hears about what, Amane changes the subject and asks how long Rindo has been waiting for him. But the protagonist said he wasn't, and he just came a little earlier, not quite understanding what he meant. Amane blushed and wondered if he had come earlier because he was as nervous as he was. To this question, Rindo also says that it's not true, and he just came here before his fan did, to which he replied that he understands. Rindo then asks a somewhat sad Amane what their plans are for the day, and then Amane immediately changes his expression and says he'll do anything. But first, he suggests going to the CD store. This surprised the protagonist a little, but he was not going to resist such an unusual desire of his friend, and said that he did not mind. But it turns out he used to love going to that store. But now he just downloads music from the internet instead of buying it on CD. During these thoughts, Amane comes up to him with the disc in his hands and tells him that he will go to pay for the disc and come right back. When the protagonist saw the CD, he got a twinkle in his eye, and then Rindo asked if Amane also liked to listen to Belt Out, to which he got a positive answer. Rindo took off his headphones and a little surprised to hear this. He said that in his school days, he liked cover bands like this one. He immediately asks his friend to give him a look at this CD. Then the surprised Aman asks if he really likes them so much, but he doesn't follow their new works. Rindo then says that he liked their guitarist, but unfortunately he left the band, after which he felt like something was missing and stopped following them. And when he talks about it, he notices the strange look on Amani's face and asks why he looks like that. Amani says that the guitarist is finally back on this album, and they even have a vocalist, which makes the protagonist very surprised. After that, out of joy, he starts shouting loudly at Amane that this can't be, but Amane doesn't seem to hear anything and blushes at being so close to him. At the same time, Rindo says that if it's really like that, he'll buy a CD like that too, to listen to their new music. After a short time, he bought a CD from the band and thanked Amane for such happy news, because according to him, if it wasn't for him, Rindo would never have known that everything was back to the way it was before. He thinks it's a goodbye, and then Amane asks if they're here for karaoke, and when he hears about it, Rindo says he's okay with it and agrees. While the protagonist sang, his fan just watched him and thought in love about how cool Rindo really is. But after a short while, Sam suddenly snatches the microphone out of his friend's hands, and he is surprised to realize that he knows the song. After the friends had a lot of fun at karaoke, they went to a restaurant, where Amane ordered a huge portion of ramen, which once again made the protagonist surprised. During their lunch, Amane notices that their hobbies are quite similar, and Rindo says that next time they will definitely go to a concert. which sounds pretty good to Amane. But he emphasizes that he hasn't been to a concert in a while. So the protagonist asks to rely on him in this matter. After they agree on how they will spend their time next time, the protagonist realizes that today they had a really fun time together. At this point, Amane is surprised that he has to eat the broth as well, which is a big surprise to him. But this unexpectedness was not a problem for him, and he was able to eat everything, with which he was congratulated by the people from the restaurant. Of course, this once again made the main character admire what a wonderful new friend he has. The waiter told him that all the food would be free if he could eat a large portion of ramen. Rindo realized that it would be quite difficult, so he asked his friend if he could put pressure on his stomach. In response, he heard that he did not even think about it. Once again, the protagonist is convinced that to spend time Amane's son is quite good. But then, leaving the restaurant, Amane told his friend that he is full, so he suggests that he just go for a drink and go home, with which Rindo naturally agrees. Already having his drinks, the protagonist asks Amane if he's still secretly following him, because it still bothers him a little. Amane says he's not like that anymore and has nothing to worry about, but decides to apologize to the protagonist for it, saying that what he did was to get to know him, and he apologizes if he was uncomfortable, because he's not going to do anything that Rindo doesn't like. Rindo asks Amane how old he is, and it turns out that Stalker is 23 years old like him, and when asked about his place of work, it turns out that he works in a detective agency, which seems logical to the protagonist. Amane blushed a little and said that he felt like he was being interrogated, and Rindo apologized for that. But Amane says it's okay, and he's happy because the protagonist is trying to understand him, so he can ask him absolutely anything he wants, because he won't lie to him about anything. I realized that Amane was just trying to amuse him a little, because he liked him, and he hadn't done anything strange during the day, so the protagonist didn't think it was a good idea to judge a book by its cover. But Amane interrupts his thoughts and tells him that even though he agrees to be friends with him, it doesn't change the fact that he likes him very much. So he hopes that the protagonist will forgive him for that night, because if he doesn't, he will die. After hearing such a sensitive topic for the protagonist, he asked his fan not to start talking about it, which naturally surprised Amane a little and made her wonder where the Rindo was going. But this time, the main character interrupts the thoughts of his admirer and says that he will write to him when he is free, because they will have to go for a walk, while thinking that he should just take his time, because that's how he'll be able to understand Amane. Amane cried from the emotions he was feeling and said that he was so happy that he was paying for it. But he did not forget to thank the protagonist for the offer. But in return, he once again coldly heard a recommendation from the Rindo, which was that if he wanted to cry, he should move away from him, and that he should pull himself together. Naturally, these words had no effect on the guy, and he told his idol that he was just the best, and once again confessed his love to him, to which, as usual, he heard a suggestion to shut up. Not long after their last meeting, the protagonist called Amane at home and asked if he was free for the weekend, because there was a special edition of a very popular brain, but you have to go to the store to buy it. And besides, according to the protagonist, he still has some things to do, and then he's free. It turned out that Amane also wanted the manga very badly, and said that they do it during a special promotion at anime stores. And it also turned out that there are always a lot of merchandise in such places, and Amane was free, so they could go together. During their conversation, Amane thought only that Rindo was very cute. When he heard that they could go together, the protagonist was very happy and began to shine with joy. He could not believe that they could go together, because according to him, he had no one to go with, and he just saved him. In response, he hears from Aman that it is very nice of him. It turns out that from that moment on, Amane's son had spent time together a couple more times, and nothing special had happened. And if anyone had seen them, they would have thought it was just two ordinary friends going out. Although Amane never stopped talking about how much he liked Rindo, but that was no barrier between them, because Rindo thought that Amane was a very nice guy, and it was getting easier for them to spend time together, and the awkwardness was gradually disappearing. The main character gets a knock at the door, and after he opens it, he sees Amane behind it, in a very playful mood. So Rindo asks him not to flip on his girlfriend, and says he knew he was coming. Amane has been coming to the main character a lot lately, and one day he came to him with a bottle of wine, which was quite expensive. All this time, Rindo was worried about whether they were spending too much time together. But still, Rindo did not send his friend away, and later learned that this bottle cost $200, which surprised him very much. And he also asked the guy if he had been eating too much ham lately. Amane realized that it was true, but he was surprised at his lover's sensitivity, and surprised that he even remembered it. But of course, he didn't tell him about it and only thought. The protagonist interrupted Amane from his thoughts and said that because he was eating a lot of ham, he wanted to eat it too, which in Amane's eyes looked like an incredibly nice thing for the Rindo to do. Right after that, Rindo suddenly took out of his refrigerator ham and cream cheese because in his opinion, they go perfectly together and are the perfect appetizer for wine. But when he saw Amane's face showing the love he felt at that moment, Rindo couldn't help but wonder what was wrong with his face, because he thought Amane was over-dramatizing the moment. But for Amane, these words turned out to be like an empty sound, and he came at his lover with hugs and words that he is very nice. Of course, still not used to it. Rindo asks him to stop because it annoys him, which, as usual, did not have any effect on Amane, and he hugged the protagonist and continued to stare at him, and once again confessed his love to him. After which, as usual, he heard a cold answer from the protagonist that he knows it all. Naturally, such a cold response pierced Amane, and he asked the protagonist not to be so cold towards him, but Rindu refuses and says he's not cold anyway. After a moment of opening the cream cheese, Amane hugs him from behind and notices that he is no longer angry when he hugs him, but Rindo denies it and says that he has gotten used to it, and that he will not stop doing it even if he is angry. To which Amane once again responds by saying that he won't do anything that his lover doesn't like. Of course, when Rindo hears this, he immediately asks him to stop, but Amane refuses, saying that he can see from the look on Rindo's face that he likes it a lot. Amane discounts her lover's intolerance and cold demeanor for being that kind of person, and asks him what he would say about a kiss. Naturally, the ringtone immediately said he didn't want it, and emphasized that he didn't understand why she would even ask him about such a thing. But Amane argues that maybe if Rindo doesn't mind a hug, he won't mind a kiss. Of course, the protagonist doesn't understand why it should be like that. But suddenly, Amane kisses him gently on the neck. Rindo had a sudden emotional outburst and immediately said that he would kill his friend, to which he simply said that his plan didn't work. But then Lindo said that if he did it again, he would get really angry. Naturally, seeing this reaction, Amane said that he understood and would not do it again, and that he would make I do as an apology. But he realizes that he is now very embarrassed. Rindo thinks that Amane is behaving better than he expected, as he was afraid of him because of what he did when they first met. But he realizes that he's a little strange. But he's glad that Amane is now thinking about the consequences of his actions, and realizes that if he touches Windu, he'll throw him out of his life. But he still trusts him enough to let him into his home and spend time with him. Rindo begins to wonder if he is abusing the kindness of his new friend, who is helping him a lot. He's having fun and not working hard, unlike Amane, who at this point acts like he's a real waiter in a restaurant, trying to please his lover. At that moment, he also thinks about what would happen if the guy were a girl. He realizes that they would be a perfect couple, because they have similar tastes and hobbies. Also, the whole situation with the surveillance could be solved differently, and he would just call her and she would do what he wants. He also notices that Amane loves him very much. But because he's a guy, they can't go out and be together. Although he doesn't think that's the only reason, because not only is he a guy, but he also did something bad to him the first time he met him. And he'll still be able to reciprocate, which will hurt him. The main character still hasn't asked him why Aman fell in love with him, but he's sure he'll find someone else someday. Unfortunately, he doesn't know anyone else he can introduce his new friend to, and he's probably the worst option of all. Remembering what happened between them, Rindo realizes that he can't reciprocate Amane's feelings, but they can't be just friends anymore anyway. At this point, they almost kiss. As usual, Rindo's reaction didn't take long, and he literally jumped away from Amane Kama. While Amane said he was just trying to understand what someone was thinking deeply, right after that, Amane emphasizes that he's embarrassed that Rindo is so scared of him, and wonders what's wrong with a simple kiss, but then says that anyone would be scared if they got that close to him. Changing the subject, Amane asked what he had been thinking about all this time, But all he heard in response was that Rindo hadn't been thinking about anything. But in his head, he was once again thinking, and as if answering his friend's question by telling him what he thought about him. But for the sensitive Amane, it was not a problem, because he believes that the protagonist is very easy to read, and he realizes that he was thinking about him. But the main character is also confused by the fact that lately he has a lot of unnecessary thoughts about his friend. In his opinion, because they have been meeting a lot lately and he can't help thinking about him. He doesn't know if Amane feels guilty for his actions. But if someone goes overboard in a relationship, the relationship ends immediately. But as their relationship continues, the protagonist is also annoyed that Amane expected it to happen this way. The next day, when Rindin is at his workplace, Senda tells him that he has been acting too strange lately. But the protagonist, of course, denies it and asks how it manifests itself, hearing the unexpected answer that it manifests itself in everything. Then Senda suggested that it could be because of the girl who came into their salon and argued that the protagonist is always sighing, suddenly embarrassed and constantly out of reality. She thinks that this is a manifestation of love, but Rindo immediately stops these thoughts and says that it is definitely not so. Then Senda said that it's very boring and asks the protagonist not to behave like that because she knows very well that he's just stuffy. So if you look at it all from the outside, it all adds up. Then Rindo gets annoyed and asks her if she really just enjoys annoying him. After this dialogue, Ringo realizes that he has to be careful, because it's not love. But maybe he really thinks too much about the whole situation. Suddenly, their regular customer Yanagi comes in and says that their shouting can be heard from the street, and claims that their shouting will scare away even the regular customers from the place. He even pokes fun at the guys, saying that he is happy that they get along with each other, but let them not overdo it. After saying this, the protagonist and Senda realize that Yanagi-san is right and apologize to him. Then Yanagi turned his gaze to us salon manager and told him that it was his duty to tell the employees off. Then he heard back that it was true, but also that he shouldn't be angry about it. Immediately afterward, the manager asked his staff if they had heard the words of their dear customer, to which he received a positive response. Right after this conversation, I heard the door creak open and a new customer walk into the salon. When he turned around to see who it was, the protagonist saw Amain on the doorstep of his place of work, who was in good spirits and greeted everyone. Of course, such an unusual meeting could not help but surprise the protagonist. It immediately came on his mind, and he began to wonder what he is doing here, because all his colleagues are in place. He's afraid that his colleagues will realize that he was the one dressed as a girl, and he thinks Amane should have told him that he was coming there yesterday, instead of just showing up out of the blue. But the main character's co-workers did not notice anything, and greeted their client calling him by name. Seeing all this situation, the main character was in complete bewilderment and could not understand what was happening. But Aman, as if not even paying attention to him, apologized to the guys for coming one day after closing the salon, and noticed that he had a job nearby. So he decided to drop by. At that moment, Rindo suddenly grabs his friend by his clothes and asks him what he is doing, to which he heard a rather simple answer. Amane could not understand the reason for such a sharp reaction from his lover Kama, and argued that he just wondered what kind of earrings here. So he came here and chatted with the employees of the salon. But Rindo realizes that this reason is implausible because his friend doesn't wear earrings, to which Amane also found an answer, and said that he saw his lover's earrings and was interested in them. Naturally, the salon staff was not happy about this behavior of their employee and asked him to stop intimidating the customer. But Yanagi guessed everything when he saw the behavior of his friend. With this guy, he realized that the main character's face changed a lot when he saw this guy. So by simple calculations, he realizes that the customer who came into the salon is the same guy from the main character's story. He can't understand why he came here. Then Amane himself noticed that he had some business nearby and decided to stop by and say hello to the manager. But unfortunately, it was time for him to go back to work, and so he wanted to leave. The protagonist believed his friend, but thought it was still very suspicious. The whole situation was quite unpleasant for the protagonist, but he was still glad that Senda didn't remember the face of the girl who had come by then. Right after that, Yanagi asks the protagonist if he has a spare minute and also tells the manager that he'll take Rindo for a second. Then he asks his friend if the guy who visited the store is the person he was talking about. Of course, Rindo didn't deny it, He just asked Yanagi how he knew it was true. Yanagi, who was very disturbed by the guy's arrival, asked why he had come and if he was threatening his friend. But Rindo said that he wasn't, and everything was a little more complicated. Dear friends, and if you want to know how this story ended and how the love relationship between the main character and his new friend developed, then be sure to subscribe to this channel to not miss the continuation, and the continuation will be released when under this video will gain 50,000 views or 5,000 likes. And to make it happen as soon as possible, be sure to discount this video to your friends who may also like it, and do not forget about the bell, and that's it. Bye-bye.